Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're digging into biopsychology. And looks like you've got a ton of notes and textbook excerpts about how our brains, genes, and even behavior all kind of work together.
Oh, yeah, it's super fascinating stuff.
It is. But I'll be honest, it's a lot to wrap your head around. So
Sure.
let's try to break it down and make it a little more manageable.
Sounds good.
Okay. So one of the big ideas here is this gene-environment interaction thing. It's like the whole nature versus nurture debate.
Right, but biopsychology actually shows us that it's not an either situation.
It's not a competition.
Not at all. Genes and environment actually work together. It's more of a collaboration.
More like a dance.
Yeah, a dance is a good way to think about it. Your genes provide the basic steps, right? Like the blueprint.
Yeah.
But your environment is what guides how you perform those steps. It influences your style and your flair. You know, it's what you bring to the dance floor.
I like that. Okay, so imagine our genes are like a recipe for chocolate chip cookies.
Okay, I'm following.
So you've got the recipe, right? That gives you your basic ingredients and instructions.
Mhm.
But then your environment, that's like the oven temperature, the quality of the ingredients, even how skilled the baker is.
Right.
All of those things affect how those cookies will turn out.
Right.
Like some might be crispy, some might be chewy, and some might even get burned.
Yeah. And it's the same with our traits and behaviors. The genes set the stage, but our experiences, like our upbringing, social interactions, our diet, our exercise habits, all those contribute to the final product. You know, it's really all part of what makes us who we are.
So someone could have genes that make them predisposed to be introverted, but if they're raised in a very social environment, always around people, they could actually become more outgoing.
Exactly. Their genes might naturally make them prefer quieter activities, but that environment can help them develop social skills and build confidence. It pushes them outside of their comfort zone. So it's all about these two forces interacting, genes and environment, and how they kind of shape each other over time.
So this genetic environmental correlation thing is like mind-blowing. So it's not just our environment shaping our genes, but it's our genes kind of nudging us towards certain environments too.
Right. It's a feedback loop.
A feedback loop, huh?
Yeah. For example, someone who is genetically predisposed to being athletic, they might naturally be drawn to sports and physical activities.
Sure. Makes sense.
And that actually further enhances their athletic abilities. So their genes created the initial inclination, and their environment provided the opportunity.
So we're not just puppets of our genes.
No. We definitely have agency. We can make choices that influence how our genes express themselves.
So understanding this interplay, this dance, is important.
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial because it empowers us to make good decisions about our health, our lifestyles, even the environments we choose to be in.
So we have some control.
Yeah, we have a degree of control over our own destinies.
That's really powerful. Now, to understand how our genes and environment actually do their thing, we need to zoom in on where all the action takes place.
We're talking about the nervous system, right?
Right. That incredible network of billions of cells that orchestrates every thought, feeling, and action we have.
It's constantly transmitting information between the brain and the rest of the body. It receives, it processes, and it responds to all kinds of signals, both internal and external.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really like the body's high-speed internet. Imagine a bustling city with trillions of messages being sent every second. That's the nervous system.
So the nervous system has two main divisions, right?
Yes.
The central nervous system,
Right.
which is kind of like the command center.
Yeah.
And the peripheral nervous system, which connects everything.
That's a good way to visualize it.
Okay, so the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, that's like the city's government making decisions.
Yeah, sending out orders.
And the peripheral nervous system is like the network of roads and highways carrying messages to every corner of the city.
Exactly. So the brain would be the mayor, and the spinal cord's like the city manager relaying messages.
And then there's two specialized branches within the peripheral nervous system.
Right.
The somatic nervous system controls our voluntary movements, right?
It's like the city's transportation system, allowing us to move around and interact with the world.
It brings in sensory information.
It does. It tells us about our surroundings. And then there's the autonomic nervous system, which takes care of all those functions we don't have to think about.
Right, like breathing and heart rate. So it's like the city's essential services,
That's right.
like keeping everything running smoothly in the background. It's pretty amazing how our bodies just do so much without us having to think about it at all.
It really is. It's like a built-in autopilot. But there's even another layer of complexity within the autonomic system.
Oh, there is.
Think about how you feel when you're suddenly in a dangerous situation.
Right. Your heart starts racing. You start breathing faster. Your senses sharpen.
Exactly. That's your sympathetic nervous system.
Oh, no.
It's like the city's emergency response team preparing you for that fight or flight response.
That's where that adrenaline rush comes from.
Uh-huh.
Wow. And what happens when the danger's over?
Well, the parasympathetic nervous system steps in. It's like the city's cleanup crew. It calms everything down, slows your heart rate, lowers your blood pressure, gets you back to a relaxed state.
So it's all about maintaining balance.
It is that delicate balance within our bodies. So we've got this intricate network, this bustling city of a nervous system.
Right. But what are the individual citizens?
What are the building blocks of this metropolis? We're talking about neurons,
Okay, neurons.
the specialized cells that make up the nervous system. Think of them as individual couriers transmitting messages all over the city. They receive information, process it, and pass it on to other neurons.
And they have a specific structure that helps them do their job.
Yes, each neuron has dendrites, a cell body, and an axon.
So dendrites are like the neuron's inbox, receiving messages from other neurons.
Precisely. These branch-like extensions that pick up signals from other neurons all over the city. Imagine them as the neuron's antennas. And the cell body is the neuron's central processing unit. It's where all the incoming information gets integrated.
Okay, so the dendrites receive, the cell body processes,
Yeah.
and then the axon is what transmits the message to other neurons.
That's it. The axon is a long, slender fiber that carries the signal away from the cell body.
Like a cable transmitting data.
Yeah. And a lot of axons are covered in this fatty substance called myelin. It helps to speed up transmission. It acts like insulation on an electrical wire.
So the myelin makes the signal travel more efficiently.
It does, like a superhighway for information.
Hmm.
And at the end of the axon, we have the terminal buttons. They're like the neuron's outbox.
The outbox,
They contain tiny sacs called synaptic vesicles. Those hold the neurotransmitters. And then there's the synapse, the tiny gap between the terminal buttons of one neuron and the dendrites of another. It's like a microscopic bridge between two couriers.
And that's where the communication happens.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens. Neurotransmitters are released from the terminal buttons. They cross the synapse and carry the signal to the dendrites of the next neuron.
So the electrical signal traveling down the axon is converted to a chemical signal.
At the synapse.
Wow. It's like a relay race with the electrical signal passing the baton to the chemical signal.
That's a great way to think about it.
And neurons operate on an all-or-nothing basis, right?
Exactly. Just like flipping a light switch, the neuron either fires or it doesn't. There's no in between.
So it's not about how strong the signal is, it's about whether or not it reaches a certain threshold.
Yes, that triggers the neuron to fire. And remember, this communication isn't static. The connections between neurons can get stronger or weaker depending on our experiences and what we learn.
Which is what neuroplasticity is all about, that the brain can actually adapt and rewire itself.
You got it. Our brains are always changing and evolving, making new connections and pruning old ones based on our experiences. It allows us to learn new things, form new memories, and even recover from brain injuries.
So we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. We can actually shape and mold our own brains through what we do and what we experience.
Exactly. That's one of the most important things to remember about biopsychology. It's not just about how our brains work, but about recognizing the power we have to influence our own brains and our own lives.
Yeah, that is powerful. Okay, so we've explored the highways, the couriers, but what about the language they're using? That's where neurotransmitters come in.
Absolutely. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messenger carrying signals between neurons. They're the words in the brain's vocabulary. Each one has a unique message.
Influencing a bunch of different functions.
From mood and sleep to learning and memory.
Wow.
Think of it like a symphony. Each neurotransmitter plays its own instrument, and together they create the harmony of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
Okay, I'm ready to learn about the instruments in this neural orchestra. Let's start with acetylcholine. What does it do?
It's involved in muscle action and memory. It makes sure that muscles contract and relax properly, and that memories are formed and retrieved efficiently.
Acetylcholine also has something to do with attention and alertness, right?
It does. So when we're focusing on something or learning something new, acetylcholine is there helping those signals fire.
Okay.
And when acetylcholine levels are messed up, it can cause problems with memory and thinking, like in Alzheimer's disease.
That's scary. Okay, what about dopamine?
Dopamine. That's the feel-good neurotransmitter.
Oh, yeah, the feel-good one.
It plays a role in reward, motivation, and even movement. Dopamine is released when we do something pleasurable.
Like when you achieve a goal or eat a delicious meal.
Exactly. And it motivates us to go after those pleasurable experiences again.
So it's dopamine that gives us that sense of satisfaction and drives us to repeat those behaviors that feel good.
It is. But dopamine also plays a role in controlling movements. When dopamine levels are imbalanced, it can cause movement disorders, like Parkinson's disease.
Right, where people have tremors and have trouble moving. Okay, so we've got acetylcholine, we've got dopamine. What about serotonin?
Serotonin. It's super important for regulating mood, sleep, and appetite.
So if someone's feeling down or depressed, could that be because of low serotonin levels?
It could be. A lot of antidepressants work by raising serotonin levels in the brain.
Oh, okay. Interesting. But mental health is complex, right?
It is. There are lots of factors that contribute to conditions like depression.
And last but not least, there's GABA.
Ah, GABA. It's like the brain's natural tranquilizer.
The tranquilizer.
Uh-huh. It calms things down, reduces anxiety.
Oh, wow. So when someone's super anxious or stressed, their GABA levels could be out of whack.
They could be. A lot of anti-anxiety meds work by boosting GABA's effects. It's amazing how these tiny chemicals can have such a big impact on us,
Yeah,
mentally and physically.
it really is. So the brain's like this complex chemical factory, always producing and regulating these neurotransmitters, trying to keep everything in balance.
A very delicate balance. It's really quite impressive.
So we've talked about the highways and the couriers and the language they use. Now I'm ready to explore the concert hall itself.
The brain, the most complex organ in the human body.
Exactly. It's time to dive into the brain.
It's like a vast city with different regions that specialize in different functions.
It's mind-blowing. We'll be exploring the brain stem, the cerebellum, the forebrain.
Unraveling the mysteries of each region, seeing how they all contribute to making us who we are.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Welcome back to our deep dive into biopsychology. Before the break, we were talking about the nervous system as a bustling city. So let's continue with that analogy as we start exploring the different regions of the brain.
Sounds good.
Let's start with the brainstem. It's located at the base of the brain,
Okay.
connecting to the spinal cord. And it's responsible for all those essential functions that keep us alive.
Like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, those things we don't even have to think about.
Exactly. It's like the city's power grid, making sure there's a constant supply of energy. It keeps everything running smoothly. The brainstem also regulates sleep and wakefulness, like the city's day-night cycle.
I like it. Okay, so just above the brainstem is the cerebellum. What's its role in our brain city?
Think of the cerebellum as the transportation hub. It coordinates all the movement and traffic flow.
Keeps things moving.
It keeps things balanced. Literally, it's responsible for balance, coordination, and smooth movements.
So when we're learning to ride a bike or play an instrument, it's the cerebellum that helps us fine-tune those movements, make them more automatic.
Exactly. It gets input from the sensory systems and the motor cortex, and it helps us adjust our movements in real time. Make sure we don't topple over or, like you said, hit the wrong notes.
Wow. Okay. So moving up from the brainstem and the cerebellum, we come to the forebrain. And this is where things get a little more complex, right?
Yeah, the forebrain is much more sophisticated. Think of it as the city's cultural and economic center. It's the most highly developed part of the brain, responsible for those higher-level cognitive functions, emotions, sensory processing.
Okay, so if the brainstem is keeping the lights on and the cerebellum is directing traffic, the forebrain is where all the art and music and innovation are happening.
I like that. And within the forebrain, we have several key structures, each with its own special job to do.
Like what?
Well, there's the thalamus. It acts as a sensory relay station.
A relay station.
Yeah. All sensory information except smell passes through the thalamus before being routed to the appropriate areas of the cortex for further processing. It's like the brain's air traffic controller.
So it makes sure all the incoming signals get to where they need to go.
Precisely. And then nestled within the forebrain, we find the limbic system,
A limbic system.
often called the emotional brain.
Okay.
It includes structures like the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. It's a vibrant hub of emotions, memories, and motivations.
So if the thalamus is the post office, the limbic system is where we go to experience joy, fear, love, sadness, all those intense feelings that make us human.
That's a great way to think about it. The amygdala, for instance, is like the city's security system. It's always scanning for potential threats.
And triggering that fear response, the fight or flight response we talked about earlier.
Yeah. The amygdala also plays a big role in forming emotional memories. That's why certain smells or sounds can trigger such vivid memories. They can instantly transport us back to a particular time or place.
Wow, that's so true.
And then there's the hippocampus. It's like the city's library.
Okay, the library.
All those memories are stored and organized there, ready for retrieval. It helps us form new memories, and it turns short-term memories into long-term memories.
So if the amygdala reacts to danger, the hippocampus is there to help us remember the experience so we can avoid it in the future.
Exactly. And just below the thalamus, we find the hypothalamus. It's like the city's control center for our basic drives and motivations.
Now, hunger, thirst, sleep, those kinds of things.
The hypothalamus keeps those internal systems running at optimal levels, like the brain's thermostat. And it releases hormones that influence things like growth, metabolism, and our response to stress.
It sounds super important.
Oh, it definitely is. And then finally, we come to the cerebral cortex, the outermost layer of the brain.
The cerebral cortex.
This is where the magic of human cognition really happens.
Okay, tell me more.
It's the most recently evolved part of the brain, what really sets us apart from other animals.
So this is where our language, creativity, problem-solving, personality, all those things reside.
Exactly. And the cerebral cortex is further divided into 4 lobes, each with its own specialized function. We've got the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the frontal lobe.
Okay, let's take a tour of each lobe. Let's start with the occipital lobe. What does it do?
The occipital lobe is all about vision.
Okay.
It receives input from the eyes and processes that information. That's how we create a visual perception of the world around us.
So it's like the city's art district where we interpret colors, shapes, and movements.
Perfect analogy. And damage to the occipital lobe can lead to visual problems, even blindness.
Wow, okay. Moving on to the parietal lobe, what's its function?
Think of it as the city's navigation center. It processes information about touch, temperature, pain, and spatial awareness.
So it helps us understand where our bodies are in space, like when we're reaching for a cup of coffee or walking through a crowded room.
Exactly. It's what helps us avoid bumping into things.
Pretty important.
It also plays a role in attention and numerical processing.
Oh, wow. Okay, next stop is the temporal lobe. What does it do?
The temporal lobe is the communication and entertainment district. It processes auditory information.
So that's how we understand language.
It also plays a role in memory formation and recognizing faces.
So when we're listening to music or having a conversation or trying to remember what we did yesterday, that's the temporal lobe at work.
Exactly.
Wow. And last but not least, the frontal lobe, the largest lobe, right at the front of the brain.
It's like the CEO of the brain. The frontal lobe is responsible for planning, decision-making, problem-solving, impulse control, all those higher-level executive functions that make us human.
So it helps us set goals, resist temptations, navigate social interactions.
And it's also involved in personality development and emotional regulation.
It's amazing that so much of who we are comes from this one part of the brain.
It is. But remember, these different brain regions don't operate independently. They work together. The brain is an interconnected network, with different regions constantly communicating to produce our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Right. It's like a well-coordinated city. Different departments working together to make sure everything runs smoothly. And the brain has its own communication systems, right? We talked about neurotransmitters. But what about the endocrine system? How does that fit in?
Think of the endocrine system as the city's postal service.
Okay.
It's a network of glands that produce hormones.
Hormones.
They're chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to different parts of the body.
So if neurotransmitters are like couriers, hormones are more like letters.
Yes. They travel more slowly, but they can reach more distant destinations. And the hypothalamus acts as a bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system.
So controls the release of hormones.
It does. The hypothalamus is like the mayor deciding which messages need to go out through the postal service.
Gotcha. And the endocrine system regulates things like growth, metabolism, mood, stress.
It does. And speaking of the brain's ability to adapt, remember neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
It's like the city's constant renovation projects. The brain changes its structure and function in response to experience.
So our brains aren't fixed. We have the power to shape them.
Absolutely. Through our choices and experiences, we're always creating new connections and getting rid of old ones.
That's empowering. Now, you mentioned something about split brain studies earlier. What can those teach us?
Well, split brain research has been amazing for understanding how the two hemispheres of the brain specialize. These studies involve people who've had their corpus callosum severed.
A corpus callosum.
Yeah, it's the bundle of fibers that connects the two hemispheres.
They cut that.
They have to treat severe epilepsy. It basically means their hemispheres are operating independently.
Oh, wow. Imagine the city divided by a river with the bridge closed off. That's crazy. So what have they learned from studying these people?
They found that the left hemisphere is usually dominant for language. If you show a split brain patient an object in their right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere, they can name the object.
But what if you show them the object in their left visual field?
Well, then they might not be able to name it. They might just describe it in a different way or use nonverbal cues.
Fascinating. So it's like the left hemisphere is the communication center and the right is more visual and spatial.
That's a simplified explanation, but it gets the idea across. And this kind of research has been so helpful in understanding how the two hemispheres work together, even when they're not directly connected.
Wow, that's incredible. It's
Right.
been amazing to learn about all of this, from the brainstem to the cerebral cortex, and even what happens when the connection between the two hemispheres is severed.
There's still so much more to explore. In the last part of our deep dive, we'll be talking about how all these amazing brain mechanisms are shaped by our genes and our experiences. We'll look at the implications of these principles for understanding behavior and see how this knowledge can be applied in the real world.
I can't wait. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into biopsychology. It's been a wild ride exploring the nervous system, from those tiny neurons to the brain with all its amazing complexity.
Yeah, we've learned a lot.
We have, but now I'm thinking about our listeners, university students trying to make sense of all this. How does it all actually connect to their lives, their thoughts, their feelings?
Well, it's easy to get lost in all the details, but the really amazing thing is how all this biology translates into the human experience.
It shapes who we are.
It does, and it affects how we interact with the world. Biopsychology helps us understand not just the physical stuff, but also how our brains make us who we are.
And remember that whole gene-environment interaction thing we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah.
That's not just some abstract concept. It really affects how we approach our studies, our relationships, even our own mental well-being.
Definitely. Think about exam stress, for example.
Exams. Ugh.
Some people are genetically predisposed to be more sensitive to stress than others.
Right.
But their environment, things like their study habits, how much sleep they get, their support system, those can really impact how that genetic predisposition actually plays out.
So even if someone is wired to be a little more anxious, they can learn coping mechanisms and build an environment that helps them.
Exactly. When you understand how genes and environment work together, you can make choices that help you thrive, even when things are tough.
So we're not just victims of our circumstances.
Nope. We're active participants in shaping our own mental and emotional landscapes. And I think that's pretty empowering.
I agree. And it helps us understand each other better, too.
Right.
We all have different genes and different experiences.
We do. Biopsychology reminds us that everyone is different.
And there's no single approach to understanding ourselves or each other. It's a reminder that we're all dealing with our own stuff.
That's a good way to put it.
So for our listeners out there, how can understanding all this help them be better students?
Well, knowing how the brain learns and remembers can be really useful. For example, we know that spaced repetition helps strengthen neural connections.
Oh, right, spaced repetition. So instead of cramming the night before a test, it's better to study a little bit each day.
Exactly. It helps you build a strong foundation, brick by brick. And understanding how sleep affects memory can help students prioritize getting enough rest.
Which I know could be hard to do when you're in college.
It is. But remember, your brain is always changing. It's dynamic. And when you challenge yourself with new experiences, you're actually strengthening your neural connections. You're promoting neuroplasticity. So don't be afraid to try new things.
Like taking a class in a subject you know nothing about.
Yeah. Or joining a new club. Learning is a lifelong journey. Our brains can grow and change at any age.
That's amazing. And as students delve deeper into their studies, biopsychology can really help them understand so many fascinating things.
From language and decision-making to creativity and consciousness.
It's like having a key to unlock the mysteries of human experience. What about careers? What can you do with a background in biopsychology?
Oh, the possibilities are huge, and they're always expanding. Biopsychologists work in all kinds of settings, research labs, hospitals, schools, even businesses.
Really?
Yeah, they might be developing treatments for mental health conditions or studying the impact of stress on the immune system or helping older adults improve their thinking abilities.
That's incredible. It's good to know that all this knowledge is being used to tackle important issues.
Like mental health, aging, even trying to understand consciousness itself. Biopsychology is a field that's always growing and evolving. It's an exciting time to be in this field.
So much to learn, so much to discover. Well, we've really covered a lot in this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
It has. We explored neurons, neurotransmitters, the amazing brain city.
And the brain's incredible ability to change and adapt. I think the most important takeaway for our listeners is this. Your brain is not static. It's dynamic. And you have the power to shape it through the choices you make, the actions you take, the way you interact with the world.
So true. Embrace that power. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep those neurons firing.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.